So the official narrative of Manson is that from a young kid, his mom was a prostitute.
Yeah.
And he was just involved in a bunch of petty crimes throughout his life, in and out of prison, and he kept getting out of prison. And then eventually there was one point where he went in for 7 years, and then he came out different.
In 1967, and he immediately violated his parole. He was paroled to Los Angeles. Without permission, he went up to San Francisco, to the Bay Area, turned up at the parole office and said, I want a parole officer up here. They looked him up and they said, you're not allowed to be here. You've got to go back to L.A. They wrote to L.A. L.A. demanded he come back. He didn't. And then all of a sudden something happened, which I can't find the paper record of. The reason I have the records I do have is I did Freedom of Information requests to the Bureau of Prisons, and I got a part of his parole record for the time he was supervised from his release until the murders, which paints a whole different picture. He got assigned to a parole officer in San Francisco named Roger Smith, who was a criminology student at Berkeley and also a drug researcher, and working out of the Haight-Ashbury Free Medical Clinic, and that's where things get really crazy.
Now, was he connected to Sidney Gottlieb?
Not that I know of, but Jolly West, who was a psychiatrist, who went to leave of absence from the University of Oklahoma to study the explosion of the Summer of Love in '67. He somehow anticipated that like 6 months before. He went to the Haight. He opened what he called a hippie pad, a laboratory described as disguised as a hippie pad, where they put up, posters, and he had grad students. He told them in January, grow your hair long. I want you to staff this hippie pad, and we're going to study the young kids that are going to invade the Haight in the summer. He knew this all in advance, and there's a whole reason that I won't get into here about how he knew it, because it was basically engineered by a bunch of these people to happen in government. And Jolly West had been working in the CIA's MK-Ultra program since 1953, which was a program that their ultimate goal was to learn how to create programmed assassins, people who would kill without recollection or of not only the killing, also their programming. And that was what this guy's specialty was. He was a very well-known psychiatrist. And in the 70s, 75, this information about this secret program, MK-Ultra, came out because a State Department person who found the records, what was left of the records, blew the whistle. There were congressional hearings. He was identified as one of the CIA researchers who gave drugs to prisoners, to people in fake apartments to study them in the Haight and in New York and a couple other cities. And he was fingered, but he denied it, and he was never investigated. At that point, by '69, or after '69, he went to Los Angeles to UCLA and became the head of the psychiatry department there until he retired and then died. The year I started this book, it was the year he died. Oh, wow. And he was actually murdered by his son. What? Well, he was dying of cancer, as was his wife, and the son had, his wife was a doctor too. They had a family plan that if they ever became terminally ill, that the son would give them administered lethal drugs to them. So nobody knew it at the time, but after both of them were dead, and I think the son waited a number of years. There's no statute of limitation on murder, but for this kind of thing, I'm not sure why, but he did publish a book in the early 2000s. So they died, and both they died like 6 months apart. His parents were killed by the son, and that was 1999. And the son published a book in about 2011 called The Last Good Night, where he describes the planning and the killing of Jolly West and his wife, Catherine, by lethal drug administration.
Where is he now?
You want to know? That's weird. So the son wouldn't talk to me. Before he wrote the book, he said, I will never talk about my father. It's too dangerous. He had too many secrets. I couldn't get him to talk to me. Then the book comes out in 2012 or 13, where he talks about the rumors of his father being CIA, but he doesn't say anything more. It's mostly about just the human family drama of what it's like to have to be talked into it by both your parents and then to actually carry it out for them. He got a lot of press. He was on Good Morning America, all the talk shows. So when the book came out, I thought, well, now he's gone public, I'll try him again. But I waited a year or two and found out he had died in the previous year or two. And he would have only been about 55. I can't find any record of where he died, how he died. He has 2 sisters. Neither of them would talk to me. One's in Europe and one's in New York. I begged them to let me interview them. So I don't know what happened to him.
Whoa.
Yeah, I just found a death notice, you know, on Ancestry, and no record of him at any of his old addresses.
That's so weird.
Yeah, yeah. So
he didn't get in any trouble for killing his parents, even though they wanted him to kill them?
He didn't, yeah. I mean, I have the book, and somebody asked me recently how he got away with it, and I think it was something technical, like he enabled them to inject it themselves. He gave them everything, you know, he did all the concoction, but he didn't do the injection, something like that, or so he said, who knows. He did it to a way, you know, he had lawyers advising him, and there was definitely a risk of him getting charged, but I think it would have only been as an accessory, and maybe it was that if it's only an accessory, after a certain number of years, they can't charge you, rather than the actual murder. I'm not sure. That's a good question, though.
Wow, what a crazy thing, huh?
So Jolly West was working at the Haight-Ashbury Free Medical Clinic, which serviced the community in the summer of '67. It was built to take care of the needs of all these runaways, and it was opened by a guy named David Smith. This gets confusing. David Smith allowed Jolly to recruit subjects for his studies of hippies and LSD around the corner in his hippie pad, laboratory disguised as a hippie pad. And Roger Smith, who was the parole officer of Manson, had Manson come to the Haight-Ashbury Free Medical Clinic, where he was working on his own drug research and doing his parole. And it was during those pivotal 2 or 3 months. Manson got out in March of '67. He was just an ex-con. You know, he'd been in prison half his life. He was 32, I think it was 17 years in and out of federal institutions. For
dumb stuff, like stealing cars, robbing grocery stores.
Yeah, and he was never in a county jail except waiting for, you know, federal trials. Yeah, silly stuff. Stealing a car and then taking it across the state line, which makes it federal. The last thing he went to prison for was stealing an envelope from the mail, which made it a federal offense. So if that had been stealing, there was a check for $37 that he cashed. If he had just stolen that check and cashed it, it would have been a local thing. He probably wouldn't have even gotten jail time. But since he took it from a mailbox, he got a 10-year sentence. And we're going to go into that more in the second book about, it looks like they wanted him in these federal places for all those years. And even Bugliosi admits in the book why every single time he committed a petty crime, you know, stealing a car is not that serious. It happens all the time. But he always happened to go across the state line, maybe just for a few hours, making it, and then come right back. He said it was weird. Bugliosi admitted it. Well, I found evidence that there were, he didn't go of his own volition. He had no reason to go to the next state. Because they were doing this research in prisons. Wow. So I think, well, I don't want to say it now because I haven't proven any of this part yet, but I'm building a case now that this all began when he was still in prison. They're experimenting with him.
Have you ever met